They called her a bush girl. They said she was too poor, too common, too small for their family. On the morning that was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, they handed her a broom and told her to sweep the compound before she could enter their gate. She swept, she scrubbed, she wept in silence and still smiled. But what that family never knew was that the girl they humiliated was not just any girl, and the God watching over her was not sleeping. Years later, when a black convoy pulled up to their gate and a woman stepped out draped in elegance and grace, holding the hand of a man whose name commanded respect across 3 states, it was that same girl. And the truth about their own son was about to bring that entire family to their knees. If this story is already touching your heart, do not go anywhere. Watch it to the very end, because the best part is still coming. And while you are here, please take 2 seconds to like this video and subscribe to this channel if you have not done so already. Every like tells us to keep bringing you stories like this. Every subscriber means another soul gets to hear what God can do. Now, let us go back to where it all began. Amaka entered Obina's family compound for the first time on a bright Saturday morning. The harmattan wind carried red dust across the open yard as she stepped out of her uncle's old keke, smoothing the fabric of her yellow George wrapper carefully. She had borrowed it from her neighbor. She did not want them to know that. Obina walked beside her, his hand brushing hers gently. He had been her world for 2 years. Quiet, steady, and kind. He had found her at the roadside market where she sold peppers and onions beside her widowed mother. He had stopped to buy tomatoes and had stayed to talk for 1 hour. That was how love began for Amaka. Simple and unhurried, the way real things often do. She knew his family was wealthy. Obina had told her this with apology in his eyes, as if wealth was something to be ashamed of. His father, Chief Okafor, was a retired government contractor. His mother, Mrs. Ngozi Okafor, had a reputation that stretched far across the community. She was known for 3 things: her church front row seat, her expensive asoebi, and her sharp tongue. As Amaka approached the main house, Mrs. Ngozi appeared at the doorway. She was dressed in a heavy brocade blouse, gold chains stacked on her neck, and a face arranged into a permanent look of assessment. Her eyes traveled over Amaka slowly, from her shoes to her borrowed wrapper to her simple beads. Nothing was missed. Nothing was approved. "Welcome," the woman said, with the kind of welcome that was not a welcome at all. Amaka knelt to greet her with a full prostration, pressing her palms flat to the ground. "Good afternoon, ma. God bless you, ma." Mrs. Ngozi looked down at her and said nothing for a long moment. Then she turned to Obina. "You did not tell me she was this local." Obina stiffened. "Mama, please." His mother waved her hand dismissively and walked back inside. The visit continued, but the tone was already set. That night, Obina held Amaka's hand on the drive back and said, "Don't worry, she will come around. She just needs time." Amaka nodded, but in her chest, something small and quiet whispered a warning she was not yet ready to hear. The months that followed were a quiet war. Mrs. Ngozi never raised her voice at Amaka. She did not need to. Her weapons were more refined. A look here, a sigh there, a comment at family dinner about how some women did not know how to carry themselves. A question asked in the sweetest tone that carried poison underneath. "Amaka, do you know how to cook ofe onugu properly? Because my son has standards." "Amaka, where exactly did you attend secondary school? And university?" "No." "Ah, okay." "Amaka, your mother is a market woman, yes? That is good. Honest work. We thank God." Each word was a small stone thrown with precision. Amaka caught every one and said nothing. She smiled, she cooked, she cleaned whenever she visited. She sent food to the house on weekends. She fasted and prayed for the relationship. She believed that love and patience would eventually soften what pride had hardened. Obina watched it all and said little. He was a man caught between 2 loyalties, and he chose the easier one more often than he should have. When they announced the introduction date, something shifted in the family house. The women gathered in Mrs. Ngozi's parlor, and Amaka heard them through the thin curtain of the kitchen where she had been sent to make zobo for the guests. "That girl has nothing to bring," one voice said. "Obina is making a mistake. There is a doctor's daughter in Asaba whose father and Chief Okafor went to school together," they said another. His mother agreed quietly. But what can I do? He has already made his mind. All I can do is make sure she knows this family is not for play. Amaka stood over the boiling zobo with her hands trembling and her eyes burning. She poured in the ginger and the cloves and she prayed under her breath, God, please fight for me. She did not know that the battle was only just beginning. The introduction day arrived. Amaka's mother had sold 2 bags of rice and borrowed the rest to put together a decent family gift. Her uncle hired a bus. Her aunties wore their best Ankara. They came with joy, with kola, with wine, with a heart to honor. They came from nothing, but they came with dignity. Mrs. Ngozi welcomed them in the sitting room with a stiff politeness that made everyone uncomfortable. The gifts were presented, the prayers were said, the wine was poured, but when Amaka arose to carry the cup to Obina in the traditional way, Mrs. Ngozi stood up before she could take 3 steps. Wait, she said. The room fell silent. Before this wine reaches my son, Mrs. Ngozi continued, straightening the gold chain on her neck, I have some things I want to see. Amaka's uncle cleared his throat. Madam, we are listening. A wife who enters this family must be able to run this home, Mrs. Ngozi said, her eyes fixed on Amaka. My son is not a small man. He has a big life, a big future. The woman beside him must be capable. She paused, then reached behind her chair and produced a small list written on paper and handed it directly to Amaka. Amaka looked down at the list. Her eyes moved across the words slowly. Her mama craned her neck to see and then looked away, blinking hard. The list read, sweep the entire compound, scrub the kitchen floor on her knees in her borrowed wrapper, prepare a pot of ofiraku from scratch, pound the yam by hand and serve the food to the family before the wine ceremony could continue. In front of both families, on her introduction day, the day she was supposed to be celebrated, the room was frozen. Amaka's uncle stood. His voice was careful but firm. Madam, this is not how these things are done. Our daughter is not your house girl. Mrs. Ngozi smiled. Then maybe she's not ready to be our son's wife. Obina sat across the room. Amaka looked at him. Her eyes said everything. Speak, stand up, say something, say anything. Obina looked at the floor. Something cracked inside Amaka. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was the quiet crack of a person realizing they are alone in a room full of people. She took a breath. She turned to her mother, whose eyes were full of tears held back with pride. Then she looked at Mrs. Ngozi and said gently, with no anger in her voice, I will do it. Her uncle protested, her aunties whispered, but Amaka had already arisen. She swept that compound under the afternoon sun while guests watched from the veranda in silence. She scrubbed the kitchen floor on her knees in her borrowed wrapper. She stood over a hot fire and cooked ofiaku from raw palm nuts while her introduction guests sat waiting in the parlor. She pounded yam in the open yard until her arms ached, and when the food was ready, she carried it out herself, dish by dish, and served it to the family of the man she loved. Not one person from Obina's side offered to help her. Not one person stopped the humiliation, and Obina, the man who said she would be safe, sat in the parlor eating garden egg and said nothing. When it was all done, Amaka returned to the room. Her wrapper was stained, her hands were raw, her face was wet, but her chin was level. Mrs. Ngozi surveyed her slowly. Then she nodded once and said, now she can pour the wine. Amaka picked up the cup. She walked to Obina, she looked into his eyes, and in that moment she saw the truth she had been refusing to read for months. He was not going to protect her. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. She set the cup down on the table in front of him, quietly. She said, I am sorry, and she walked out. The road home was the longest road Amaka had ever walked. Her mother walked beside her without speaking, holding her hand. The bus was quiet. Her auntie stared through the windows. No one had words for what they had witnessed. That night, Amaka sat on the floor of their small room and cried until the sound left her. Her mother knelt behind her and rubbed her back in slow circles, humming an old song, the same one she had hummed when Amaka was sick as a child. You did nothing wrong, her mother said. I loved the wrong person, Amaka replied. Her mother shook her head. God is not finished with your story. She deleted Obina's number that night. He called 11 times. She did not answer. On the 12th call, she turned off her phone. She did not know then that what felt like the end was actually a door, and on the other side of that door was something she had never thought to pray for because she had never believed she deserved it.
The weeks after the introduction were heavy and grey. Amaka moved through them like a woman walking underwater. She returned to the market. She carried baskets. She greeted customers. She counted change. She slept early and woke before the sun. But her hands remained busy, and something in her refused to shrink. After 3 weeks of grief, Amaka's mother placed 50,000 naira on the table one evening, her life savings. Use it. Stop crying and use your hands. Amaka looked at the money for a long time. Then she went to the market and bought a big pot, firewood, fresh palm oil, and ingredients. She set up a small cooking spot at the junction near the motor park. She made a sign from cardboard, Amaka's kitchen. Eat well, go well. The first day, she sold 4 plates. The second day, 12. By the end of the first week, the motor park workers had adopted her as their daily lunch.
By the end of the first week, the motor park workers had adopted her as their daily lunch. By the end of the first month, she had a waiting list for her pepper soup on Fridays. She cooked with the same hands that had been humiliated, and those hands were building something. One afternoon, 4 months after she began, a black Land Cruiser pulled up near her spot. The driver stepped out and approached her stand, looking slightly puzzled, as if unsure why he had stopped. He was tall, light-skinned, dressed simply but expensively in a plain shirt and trousers. He looked at her menu board, then at the pot, and said, "What is your best food?" Amaka looked up at him. "Pepper soup and white rice," she said, "but I am almost sold out." He said, "Then give me what is left." She served him. He sat in his car and ate. Then he stepped out and came back. He said, "Who taught you to cook like this?" Amaka said, "Hunger." The man laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him. He introduced himself simply as Chidi. He did not say what he did. He did not mention the car or the driver or the ring on his right hand that spoke of a certain kind of family. He just said he would come back tomorrow. He came back tomorrow and the day after. For 2 weeks, Chidi came to Amaka's kitchen every afternoon. Sometimes he brought colleagues. Sometimes he came alone and sat on the wooden bench she had placed beside the stand and talked with her while she cooked. He asked about her life. She answered carefully, leaving out the parts that still bruised. He told her about himself slowly. He was an engineer. He had returned from London 6 months ago to run his late father's construction company. He had 2 younger sisters, a mother he adored, and a habit of getting lost in conversations with interesting people. He called her interesting. No man had ever called her interesting. One day, he arrived and found her giving a free plate to a thin young man in tattered clothes who had been hovering near the stand for over an hour, too ashamed to ask. Chidi watched her. The young man ate quickly and thanked her with both hands. Amaka packed him a small extra portion in a nylon bag for the road. When the young man left, Chidi said, "You gave away your profit." Amaka shrugged. He was hungry. Chidi was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you always do that?" She said, "When I have extra." He said, "And when you don't have extra?" She thought about it and said, "I try to make sure I do." Chidi looked at her for a long time. Then he looked away at the road. He came back the next day with a proposal. Not of marriage, not yet. He told her he wanted to move Amaka's kitchen into a proper space, a small restaurant attached to one of his company's properties. He would fund the renovation, the equipment, the first 3 months of rent. She would run it fully as her own. Amaka stared at him. "Why?" she asked. "Because your food deserves a ceiling," he said, "and because I think you do too." The restaurant opened on a Thursday. Amaka named it Ne's Kitchen after her mother. It was small but beautiful. Chidi's contractor had painted the walls a warm terracotta. There were 8 tables, each with a small vase of plastic flowers that Amaka chose herself. The smell of her cooking filled the street before the doors even opened. By noon, every table was full. Chidi came that evening after the rush. He sat at the corner table and ordered pepper soup and pounded yam and ate with the same quiet satisfaction he always had. When he finished, he said, "Amaka, I want to be honest with you." He said, "I have been coming to your stand every day for reasons that go beyond food. I find you remarkable. You are kind without being weak. You work without complaining. You give without calculating. I would like to know if there is a future between us. Not because I want to rescue you. You have already rescued yourself. But because I believe you are the kind of woman a man builds a life with, not just a life for." Amaka told him about Obina, about the introduction day, about the broom and the kitchen floor, and the pounding mortar and the silence of a man who had watched and said nothing. She told him without tears, just facts, the way you tell a story whose power has shifted from wound to wisdom. Chidi listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said quietly, "That family's behavior was shameful, and that man did not deserve you." He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers briefly. He did not linger. He did not press. He simply said, "You will never be treated that way again, not by me, not by anyone under my roof." Amaka believed him. Their courtship was gentle and deliberate. Chidi introduced her to his two sisters within a month. They received her warmly. His mother, a retired teacher named Mama Chidi, met her over a quiet Sunday lunch. She held Amaka's hand across the table and said, "My son speaks well of you. I can see why." There were no tests, no lists, no humiliation dressed as tradition. There was only the quiet, radical experience of being welcomed. 1 year after the restaurant opened, Chidi proposed. He came to Ne's kitchen after closing time when Amaka was wiping down the tables, and he got down on one knee in the empty room that smelled of pepper and palm oil and said, "This is where you built something from nothing. This is where I want to ask you to build something with me." Amaka cried. But they were the clean kind of tears, the kind that come when joy is too large for the body. She said yes. The traditional marriage was held at Amaka's family compound. Chidi's family came in full force, dressed in matching asoebi, bringing palm wine and kola and gifts stacked higher than the door frame. They came not to test the bride's family, but to honor them. Mama Chidi knelt before Amaka's mother and said, "Thank you for raising her well." Amaka's mother covered her mouth and wept. 6 months after their white wedding, Amaka discovered she was pregnant. When she told Chidi, he sat very still for a moment. Then he pulled her into his arms and held her without saying anything. And she felt his shoulders shake slightly, and she realized this strong, quiet man was crying. They named their daughter Chisom because God followed. Life was full now. The restaurant had expanded to a second location, and Chidi's company was thriving. Amaka employed 12 women in her kitchens. Many of them were women who had come to her door with stories not unlike her own. She paid them fairly. She trained them personally. She told them every month, "Your hands are your blessing. Never let anyone make you ashamed of them." Then, one afternoon, 2 years after Chisom was born, a message arrived. Chief Okafor had died. In the tradition of the community, all significant families in the area were expected to attend. Chidi's family was significant. Amaka read the message twice. Then, she set her phone down and went to check on Chisom, who was sleeping. She stood over her daughter's cot for a long time. Chidi found her there. He read her face and understood. He said gently, "You don't have to go. I can represent us alone." Amaka looked at Chisom, at the small rising of her chest, at the tiny fist curled beside her cheek. She thought about a girl in a borrowed wrapper with raw hands and wet eyes walking out of a gate. She said, "No, I will go. Not for them, for her, so that one day when she faces something hard, she knows her mother did not run." Chidi took her hand. "Then we go together." The Okafor compound was loud and noisy with the organized grief of a wealthy family burying a patriarch. When Chidi's convoy entered the gate, heads turned. Chidi stepped out first and moved to open Amaka's door himself.
She stepped out in deep blue and silver, chisom on her hip, her posture unhurried and complete. A murmur moved through the crowd like a wave. Is that Amaka, the market girl? She married who? At the far end of the compound, Mrs. Ngozi Okafor sat in the chief mourner's chair, wrapped in black. She had aged. Her gold chains were still there, but something in her face had collapsed slightly, the way pride does when it spent too long without rest. When she saw Amaka, she went still. Amaka did not cross the compound to confront her. She did not need to. She simply moved through the space as herself, greeting people quietly, accepting condolences, guiding Chisom's waving hand toward familiar faces. It was Obinna who approached her. He came from behind, his voice uncertain. Amaka? She turned. He looked older. There were lines in his face that were not there before. He looked at Chisom and then back at her. He said, "You look well." She said, "I am well." After a long silence, Obinna said in a low voice, "I am sorry for that day. I should not have let it happen." Amaka looked steadily at him. She felt nothing sharp, no anger, no triumph, only the mild surprise of a woman discovering an old wound had quietly finished healing without her realizing it. She said, "I forgive you, Obinna. Take care of yourself." Then she turned and walked back to where Chidi was standing, with Chisom now in his arms, the little girl patting his face with both hands while he pretended to be very seriously injured. Amaka stood beside her husband and watched her daughter laugh. She had been called a bush girl. She had been handed a broom on her introduction day. She had been tested and graded and found wanting by a woman who could not see beyond wrappers and market stalls. But God had seen differently, and what God sees is always the final word. Across the compound, Amaka could see Mrs. Ngozi watching her. Amaka met her gaze calmly. She did not look away. She did not stare with malice. She simply let the woman see. Here I am. Here is my husband. Here is my daughter. Here is my life. The life you said I was not enough for. Then Amaka looked away first. Not in defeat, in freedom. Chidi leaned close and whispered, "Ready to go home?" She breathed in the afternoon air. She felt Chisom's small hand find hers. "Yes," she said, "let us go home." As the convoy left the compound, the crowd watched in silence, not the mocking silence of that introduction day, a different silence, the kind that falls when people have witnessed something they did not expect and can't quite name. Amaka did not look back. She had learned long ago that some things only become beautiful when viewed from ahead. As you watch this story to the end, receive this prayer with an open heart. For every woman who has been weighed on scales that were not made for her, may God break those scales. For every person who was tested before they were welcomed, who was made to earn a love that should have been freely given, may you find the love that does not come with conditions. If someone handed you a broom when they should have opened their arms, if someone watched your tears and chose silence, if someone made you feel that your value was in your labor and not your soul, may God comfort you today. What they called common, God is calling chosen. What they called too small, God is calling enough. What they dismissed as market girl, village girl, poor girl, ordinary girl, God is calling daughter. May every door that closed in shame reopen in celebration. May every person who looked down on you look up to see what God has done. May your children carry none of your wounds, only your wisdom. May your hands that were used to serve others be served in return. May your next season be so full that the empty ones become distant and small. You were never the problem. You were always the blessing. In Jesus' name.